It was time to start the interview. We were all joined online. And don't worry, because it was a Beyond Fest interview, we had some technical errors and we definitely didn't start on time. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. I only laugh, I only kid with today's guest because there is always a gremlin in the works when it comes to a Beyond Fest event that makes it not start on time, even when everything is actually in place. Like, I've been to the events where it's a sold-out house, people have generally gotten their concessions, everything's generally in place, and there's still something that delays it. God only knows what. So the good news was we were able to keep that tradition alive with some technical errors for today's interview. But hey, the good news is we got through it. We got the interview, damn it. And it is with today. We have the programmers, the gods of Beyond Fest. We have American Cinematheque's Grant Moninger and Beyond Fest Christian Parks. And they are with us today to chat about what it took to put on a film festival during a pandemic. Now, that is a feat for anybody that is able to do it. And many film festivals, actually, I would say most film festivals, have very smartly gone virtual. I just recently went to the AFI festival online, and it was interestingly through an app, and everything worked really well. They made movies available for only a certain amount of time, and it was timed with reality, so you couldn't really exactly come back and stream it later. Some of them would give you a little time. But what was interesting about Beyond Fest was Christian and Grant decided to keep the festival live by doing it at a drive-in that in these days, it's about 45 minutes from LA, sometimes longer. You know what? I'm not going to argue traffic with you today, but I am going to talk extensively about who Grant Moninger of American Cinematheque and Christian Parks of Beyond Fest are, because they are our guests. And we got into their past, what brought them out there, what are the important things about programming any sort of a festival, and then, of course, programming the Beyond Festival. And, you know, this is a really fun interview because Christian and Grant have been nice enough to have me as a moderator at some of the events, and you've actually heard them in this podcast. I think today we talk about Fight Club in 2001, A Space Odyssey with the actors. And, you know, there's more as well. And it's always been fun working with them. But I will say one thing that's kind of strange. And I've been working with Christian Grant, just and even just coming to their screenings as a guest for years, okay? But the weird thing is, every time we see each other, we're all so busy that we actually never have a time to sit down and talk. So I thought when I did this episode that this would actually be a cool chance to actually chat with them, which is something that at a busy event you could never do, because you're either getting the event going at the beginning or you're clearing everybody out of the house so you could go home because you're exhausted at the end. So this event, you know, we weren't sure how long it was going to go. It, of course, turned into a super episode, a 2-hour episode, and there's just a lot of good stuff in it. But here is the very funny thing, and I'm just going to give you a spoiler alert about it, okay, in advance. The one thing that I figured out about Christian Parks during this interview, after learning a bit more about his past, is he, in a former life, was actually Ian Faith. That's right, the band manager of Spinal Tap. That is now what I think of when I think of Christian Parks. His energy is Ian Faith. His professionalism is for sure Ian Faith, and Ian Faith was a fantastic manager of Spinal Tap. Even though they parted ways at one point, they did all get back together in the end. So it is no dig on Mr. Parks, but Ian Faith, I cannot stop thinking about that, because knowing that being a rock and roll band manager is part of Christian Parks' past, something I never knew after doing them all these years, totally makes sense about how he approaches some of his finer moments at the Beyond Fest. And it's actually really fun because Parks and even Grant as well both give us insight into kind of what needs to be done to get these screenings off the ground sometimes, because, you know, you gotta fight a fight. And there's gatekeepers in the way, and you got to get through them. And that's what Christian and Grant were so good about talking about. And I'm so glad we actually got a chance to sit down, because I miss seeing them in person, and they really accomplished a lot. by doing the 1 week long Beyond Fest at a drive-in here in Los Angeles. So we're going to talk all about it. You don't have to have seen the movies. You just have to love movies and go into a movie theater, because that's what we're going to be talking about. And that's what makes me miss Christian and Grant even more, because now we don't get to see them in the hallways as we walk back and forth hurriedly before a screening. But nonetheless, there's something here for everyone, even if you've never been to Beyond Fest. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope while you're surfing around online, you also check out Backstory Magazine. That's right. You could find us at backstory.net, or you could find us through our iPad app. And I swear to you, we are so close on publishing our long-delayed pandemic issue. All the ducks are finally in a row now, so that production is moving forward. There's some really cool stuff here. Some stuff that I really wanted to get in the magazine for a long time, that some writers were really nice enough to collaborate on. And it's going to be a really cool episode, issue 42. That's what we're publishing next. And then we're going to go straight into production on issue 43. I don't see a reason why it's going to be, having as much drama around publishing it. It should be a little easier, even though things are still a mess for film distribution during the pandemic. I think our production line is in place the way that I could make it happen a bit sooner, would be the way to put it. So look, it would mean a lot to us to have your support. If you've never read us, go to backstory.net. You could read the free issue. You could also find it in our iPad app. And I'll even give you a reason why. If you like the free issue to subscribe, you could use discount code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5 over at backstory.net. And that'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription that'll work on your desktop, laptop, or an iPad app. But you have to use it at backstory.net in order to get it into the iPad, because you can't use that discount coupon code on the iPad. I know it's complicated, but there you go. And look, there's a lot of great things. I know you'll enjoy it. So thanks for considering giving my passion project a shot. But now, without any further ado, let's get into our conversation that had a delay in the beginning and a few delays in the middle, as there was, of course, a tech event in the middle as well that you'll see me edit around, but you won't even know what happened, damn it. You will just see a flash frame. But nonetheless, let's get into our interview with Christian Parks and Grant Moninger about what it took to put on 2020's Beyond Fest. Christian Parks, Grant Moninger, how's it going? You guys aren't filmmakers. How did you get in this feed? What's going on? You're programmers, for God's sakes. You run a film festival. Everything's changing for the pandemic.
It's crazy. We have infiltrated, Jeff. It's over. We're storming the gates. It's a beautiful day.
Well, here's the first question that I'm going to ask, just so our podcast listeners around the world get a sense. Who art thou, and from whence dost thou hail? Parks, we got to start with you.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you for having me. Podcast listeners everywhere, hello, and thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. My name is Christian Parks. I am one of the founders and co-conspirators of Beyond Fest, a genre festival that is based in Los Angeles, that serves the good people of this city. Yeah, that's my life.
Slow down, Parks. Where are you from, though?
Originally from England. Yeah. So originally from England, moved to the US, Birmingham, the home of heavy metal, ordained by Black Sabbath. And I moved to the US nearly 25 years ago. My first job was at Stan's Video.
Okay, we'll get there. Hold on. Going back to Birmingham, because I'm going to ask you these same questions. Okay. What was your favorite movie theater in Birmingham growing up?
It was the King's Theater. It was in West Brom. I believe it was 3 screens, and I saw films there when I was really young. That was where I first saw Superman the movie. I didn't understand that Clark Kent was actually Superman. I didn't get the whole costume change.
Those glasses. If I were to take off my glasses right now, you would have no idea. It was the glasses.
Yeah. But what I did do is when I was underage, I snuck into the Blob there, and I snuck into A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. And I think I was like 14, and I said that I was 18, and they let me in. So,
well, good choices. Last question before we get to Grant. What was your first film experience that you coherently remember? So it doesn't have to be a favorite film, but the first film you actually remember being in a theater and seeing.
Ooh, in a theater and seeing was Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. That was the first film that I saw in a movie theater.
Okay.
The first film that I rented on VHS was Poltergeist. And we were the last people on our street to get a VCR, but we lived in a pretty broke-ass part of town, and we weren't allowed to tell anyone that we had a VCR. So I had to sneak it in, and then I watched Poltergeist at 6 a.m. in the morning because my dad hated horror movies and refused to let us watch it. So
That's amazing.
We rented it. The next morning, I got up at 6 a.m. to watch it, and it freaked me out to this day.
Were you glad that you watched it with daylight outside?
Well, it was still dark at that point. It's England. Yeah, it was England. And I don't know if you know, but England gets about like an hour of sunlight every week. So it's just rain the rest of the time.
All right. Grant.
Hey now.
Where are you from?
Hey, can you hear all these crows? I have a lot of crows outside suddenly.
That's very thematic. I'm glad that you
stop on the freeway for crows outside.
I'm glad you summoned them.
Where am I from? Well, you can see I'm originally from outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a place called Greene County, Pennsylvania.
Nice.
Very rural. And I'm from there, in like an old spooky house. We had some of our windows, didn't have all of them. One side of our house was painted red, and then we never finished the rest. So that's where I grew up in that kind of thing in the middle of the woods. And we had no neighbors for miles except there's a church with a spooky cemetery. And then and that's where all my relatives were.
Well, so were you on a farm per se or just in a highly rural area?
We had another guy's cows, that trampled down. So you could go where we were obsessed with television. So we had to run a TV antenna from the top of the hill down into a valley, using a series of poles and wires so that we could get both regular stations and like channel 24, so you can see Doctor Who and things like that. So we were very rural, but we would use cows to tramp down the woods so we could watch television.
I love it. What was your local theater?
Local theater? Well, I saw Superman at Showcased West. And then in high school, there was a thing called the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which is where I saw like Blue Velvet and like Baxter and whatever weird things it would be at that. It was like a repertory cinema, no longer around, but that was that. But growing up, we go out to Showcase West out by the airport.
And what was the first film that you remember seeing, like being aware that you were in a theater?
I think I have fragments of that first Superman screening. I remember parts of Prophecy. I remember parts of Manhattan. But I really remember watching The Jerk and falling asleep and then waking up in the middle of The Jerk and everyone's laughing at him being naked and then getting all pissed off that they're all laughing at Steve Martin and like looking around, wondering why all of a sudden they had turned on our protagonist. That's like the first thought I remember having in a theater.
Wait,
other than Prophecy going like, oh, God, get me out of here.
Sorry to interrupt. How old were you when you saw The Jerk?
5.
Wow. Okay.
So they would hope that I would fall asleep first, like the Prophecy. I think they're like, we'll go see the Prophecy. And they would hope I fall asleep. But if I didn't, I would just like pass faint and then I would fall asleep.
Well, so, since we're going to get to eventually, and it's going to take a while, we're going to get to Beyond Fest 2020, which was done at drive-ins. What was your first drive-in experience for both of you? Grant, starting with you.
I don't even remember. It must have been somewhere in Pittsburgh. I just remember like looking through a car at a movie. Like that's my first, I was like in a back seat and then falling asleep, really. I was very young. I don't remember what it would even have been.
Was it something you commonly did or was it just kind of like a random?
No, we only did it maybe 2 times, I think, growing up. And I have very faint memories of them.
Okay. I never did until I got out to California growing up and I was from Kansas.
Like early 80s. So I have no memory of.
All right. Parks?
So my first experience at a drive-in was actually this summer when we started programming at the Mission Tiki. No drive-ins in England, obviously. And then when I moved to the States, it was just something that I never did because there's just an abundance of awesome theaters. And so, yeah, it was just something that just I always should have done, but I just never did. And Grant actually said, during the pandemic, he was like, what do you think about doing the drive-in? And I was like, I guess, I don't know. Let's try it and give it a go. And instantly fell in love first time out. So the first film that I saw at a drive-in was Mad Max Fury Road.
Nice.
Which is, I think, like the perfect way to enter that world.
Well, so, for both of you've come a long way to get out here to Hollywood. What drew you out here? Did you want to write and direct? Was that kind of what originally brought you out here to get into the film industry?
I wish I had a fantastical story like that. I mean, I loved films from my earliest memories were of watching films and just being obsessed with movies, and in particular genre movies. And it started with Universal, and I gradually got tougher as I got older. But it was, it's far more mundane. The reason why I actually ended up here is because the person that I was with, she had a job that relocated to Los Angeles. So it was like, all right, fine, let's go there and try it. But I had no desire to actually work in the film industry or to do anything in. My issue was that I loved film too much, and I didn't want to work in the industry and for work to take away from what I felt was like just a real pure love and enjoyment of film. So I was able over the years to kind of traverse that and get to a good spot where what I do for work is actually rooted in the thing that I love the most, which is movies.
Okay.
So, but we can get to that. But it was a pretty generic path to get to Los Angeles.
Okay. Well, so Chris, did you ever want to write and direct? Did you ever want to make films beyond just loving films?
I went to school in England and I studied film.
Where'd you go?
For a tin pot town, Staffordshire University. It sounds very special, but trust me when I say that it's not. But yeah, so I studied film, and for a fleeting second, I thought that I actually wanted to make movies, but then quickly realized that I didn't, because it's kind of a nightmare. So yeah, I just kind of like sat back and then just in turn just watched from afar, and shifted at school the approach to being more analytical about film. And so, yeah, that was just the path that I took. But it was really difficult in England at that time as well. The concept of making films, everything was really kind of run by the BFI, which the films that broke through and got funding, it was quaint old England. It was merchant ivory. It was a very specific style of filmmaking. And it was completely the opposite of the cinema that I'd fallen in love with, which was, the Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, that whole era of, late 60s, late 70s era cinema, and just tough as nails exploitation films that then kind of came out of that as well, like late 70s. And then the genre films of the 70s in particular just didn't exist in the UK. Everything was so squarely tied up.
Well, really briefly, because I always ask this to British filmmakers, what did you think of the lottery fund? Because that slowly changed things in which I wish we had it here in America, in which it gave opportunities to voices that were outside of what you just described as quaint England as well. Yeah,
it really did. That really came into fruition towards the end of my time in the UK. But yeah, the lottery fund's amazing. So for anyone who doesn't know, everyone knows about lotteries in America, but they just didn't exist in the UK. And part of the deal of implementing a lottery was it was government run, and a part of it was X amount of proceeds from all of the lottery ticket sales every week would go to fund filmmaking, and not just filmmaking, but cultural efforts in the UK as well as a whole. So it was pretty progressive back then, and it's proved to be amazing for the film industry back there.
All right. What was your first job when you came to Los Angeles? I'm guessing that's where you came when you came to America.
No, I actually moved to New York first. I was a tour manager for some hardcore bands that some are still around and some rightfully disappeared.
Okay,
yeah.
that is 100% Parks energy. It's all actually filling into place now because that is you. That is you.
Yeah, it was insane. And so I ended up seeing, I saw America coast to coast and every truck stop in between, and all of Europe and Asia in that role. So,
all right.
yeah, and that was just something that I just kind of fell into through friends. So I just kind of ran with that. But that's what I started doing when I was in the US.
And then last question before Grant, how did you then navigate to Los Angeles and being involved in film?
It was, so as I said, my partner at the time, she had a job that relocated to Los Angeles, and I didn't want to take a job in the film industry. And I actually worked for a fleeting moment. I worked at ICM. I was on a literary agent's desk after wearing a shirt and tie for a few months. I was like, this is not for me. So I left that. I worked at Lionsgate for a little while in the legal department on someone's desk. The attorney will remain nameless, but she was a monster. And
what was the worst thing you had to do as an assistant?
Be in close proximity to her. So she was just evil. But it was really fun because I actually looked her up kind of recently, and there are a bunch of lawsuits involving her, which was like cool. So I felt vindicated there. But that experience really told me, working at a studio and then working at an agency, that I really didn't want anything to do with that side of the film industry and the film business.
So Grant, what brought you out here to Los Angeles?
What brought me out here? Airplanes. I don't know. I lived in New York, and then I had some sick relatives, and I had to take care of them, and I could gone back to New York. And then I met Frederick Forrest on a boat, and then I moved out here.
Okay. And what'd you do once you got out here?
So I didn't know where to live, so I lived in Frederick Forrest lives in Santa Monica, so he's the only guy I knew him. So I moved to Santa Monica, and then I knew the brother of a programmer at the American Cinematheque. And so they said, hey, do you want to work at this Aero Theater that's opening? And I went, all right. So then I started working there as a manager of the Aero Theater.
You started as a manager?
Yeah.
Had you had any theater experience before that?
Not that kind of theater. I had done acting and ran my own theater company in Philadelphia and also New York City, but like working in a movie theater, no, I'd never worked in a movie theater.
Okay. And so obviously, as you just said, you've acted. Have you ever wanted to write and direct and become a filmmaker yourself?
I wouldn't want to direct anything. I don't think I would be.
Really? Just like Parks. All right.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to direct anything. Perhaps I could write something, but I wouldn't want to direct anything. I act in things, but only if someone just calls me and says, you want to do this, really.
All right.
So I do voice acting and then I act in some films here and there, but I don't like to audition for things. It's no fun. So if somebody calls me, I'll do it, but I don't want to.
Do you have a bad audition?
You're like Jack Nicholson. You don't audition. You just wait for people to call you.
I don't audition.
Well, wait, Grant, is this because you had a bad audition story? Was something bad once went down in an audition?
Oh, they're all bad, right? They would go in. I don't know. I remember once they were like, hey, read this scene from 100 cigarettes, something. And I was like, I don't know what. I couldn't make heads or tails of any of it. And it was like some monologue. And I was like, I don't want to do this. But then in voice acting, you could literally just constantly re-record your voice, So, but like some things I'll occasionally audition for if someone tells me to do that. But they'll have to. I don't want to go out there and do all that.
Okay.
It sounds like a real drag, man. But good luck to anyone that continues to do that. Sounds like a bummer.
Well, as we're going to be focusing on Beyond Fest, what is the first film festival memory each of you have? Like not Beyond Fest or anything related that you worked on, but the first festival you attended as just regular Joe, and what wowed you about it? Parks.
Okay. It was in Nottingham, England. It was called Black Sunday, and it was an annual 24-hour round-the-clock horror festival. I took huge bags of food with me. I slept on the floor, and a friend of mine was sat in the back row, and he handed me what was like a little strip of paper and it had like some writing on it, and I took it off him. I took this piece of paper, this like square of paper, and I took it off him and I turned it over to read the paper. And as I did that, all of this white stuff fell out of it. And as the white stuff fell out of it, I realized that it was his like little kind of folded up envelope of cocaine that he had to get him through the 24 hours. And I just tipped it all over the floor. He immediately dropped to his knees and then started dabbing the coke that was on the floor, matted into the carpet. So that was my first festival experience. And then
how old were you? You were like 5?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I was maybe 17, but then that inspired myself and Spencer, who created Death Waltz and runs all the record stuff at Mondo. We created a festival that we then programmed called Nothing Shocking, which got raided by the police and stuff. So
wait, why did it get raided by the police? And I love that you used the Jane's Addiction title.
Yeah, that's what it was from. It got raided because we were screening Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And at that point in time, it was illegal to even be in possession of the film. So we were going to screen it. We had a 16 millimeter print. And we got raided because we publicized that we were screening the film. At that point in time, you could only show that film along with the rest of like the Pussy Video nasties. You could only show them in what were called gentlemen's clubs, which were basically adult theaters, and you needed a membership to have them. So we rented a theater, we screened a bunch of films, and TCM was going to be one of them, and we got raided. But we got the reels out, and then when the police left, we put the reels back in the projection booth, and then we ran it at 2 a.m. So
what year was that?
That was probably 1993, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a little earlier.
You're very lucky that your friend was not there with his envelope when the police came to you.
Yeah, that would have been rough.
Grant, what was your first film festival that you were just an attendee at, and what was your fondest memory of it?
I don't know if I went to film festivals. There wasn't a lot of film. I don't know if there would be a film festival in Pittsburgh. There was, I imagine, but I never went to them. Like a triple feature of Troma films. Okay. That would be like, that was my film festival. And then the next one would have been in Los Angeles, this movie I was in about with the Clinton family. I went to Dances with Films, it was called. And it was at the Monica Fourplex. It was my first journey to Los Angeles. And that was my first festival.
Wow.
I didn't think much of it either way.
And then what was the first festival you worked, since Parks just said his? I would guess it would be part of the Noir Fest at the Tech, right?
Man, I couldn't tell you. It's been 15 years at the Cinematheque. I've worked probably hundreds of festivals. So I don't know what. But
your first probably, like if it was 15 years ago when you joined, the biggest festival that the Tech generally had, aside from like, the French Consulate and best, new Spanish cinema and stuff like that, would be really the Noir Fest. Was the one yearly recurring one that I remember early on.
Could have been.
Okay. All right.
I remember Jeremy Irons came in.
Oh, that's cool.
Guy that came in that I saw.
All right. Well, so now we're going to just get to who you guys are now and what you do. Parks, you wear many, many hats, and explain to our listeners who you are now aside from Beyond Fest.
So my day job and the thing that keeps me awake at night is I actually run marketing for the film distributor Neon. So, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Parasite, Ammonite is coming soon. I just dated this podcast. And we just released Totally Under Control, the Alex Gibney documentary, which was filmed in secrecy over the last 6 months to cast light on the Trump administration's disastrous response to COVID.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool that Neon made that free to watch for a while before the election. That was really cool of them. But so people understand Neon is to an extent an outgrowth of Alamo Drafthouse because Tim League is the co-founder of Neon. Would you describe it that way, or am I off?
You're close. Yeah, it's so Tim created Alamo Drafthouse Theaters. He partnered with this guy Tom Quinn, who is a longtime film distributor exec. He worked with Bong going all the way, Bong Joon-ho, going all the way back to his first films. And he's been really instrumental in bringing filmmakers to the US and bringing them exposures. And so Tim had a theater chain. Tom was looking to set up a new company, and so they formed Neon. But there's a real clear separation of church and state. Tim is 100% squarely focused on the theater chain, and Tom is 100% squarely focused on Neon. And my background, I actually worked at Alamo Drafthouse for I think 3 years. I led brand and marketing there, and then segued into Neon full time because I was working on Neon films, Colossal, Ingrid Goes West, Bad Batch. And then when Neon acquired I, Tonya, it was just too big of a film and too big of a job. So I shifted then from Alamo to Neon, and I've been there for the last 3+ years.
Yeah, that was a blast when they got I, Tonya, because I fought to get that in my screening series. I was so glad it got the writing nominations that it so rightly deserved. It was fantastic.
Yeah, special film.
But so you also had, and this does parlay into Beyond Fest a bit. You had involvement with Fantastic Fest, which was an Alamo Drafthouse outgrowth.
Yep. Yeah. So my first role at Drafthouse. So the theaters were the core, but then it had these other businesses that kind of surrounded it that grew out of Alamo. Mondo was part of that. Drafthouse Films was part of that. Birth Movies Death, which was its print and online editorial platform. And then the other piece was Fantastic Fest. So I was shepherding those separate businesses for a while and bringing them closer into the Alamo fold. So for a couple of years, I was deeply involved in Fantastic Fest as well. And but I'd already, before I started at Alamo, I'd already started Beyond Fest. And that was one of the things in going to Alamo Drafthouse. I said, look, I've got Beyond Fest, and I live in Los Angeles. I still want to continue to do both of those. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do both of those. So I would work Fantastic Fest, leave at 6 a.m. after a week of destruction, and then 7:30 that night we would start Beyond Fest. It was
that's interesting. I thought Beyond Fest was well after Fantastic Fest was established. They were concurrent, like in their beginnings.
Well, no, at the point that I joined Alamo Drafthouse. So Fantastic Fest, Fantastic Fest is on, I think, this would have been year 15.
Okay.
And Beyond Fest, I think this was year 7 or 8.
Yeah.
But at the time that I started at Drafthouse, Fantastic Fest was up and running, but Beyond Fest was up and running as well.
And so what gave you the idea, you and Grant join in any time, for Beyond Fest, and how did you guys join together?
Grant's laughing. So I lived in Los Angeles. The best experiences that I had in Los Angeles were at the American Cinematheque, because they had a science fiction and fantasy festival that those guys programmed. And it was like a week of oddball stuff that went from Mickey movies to Ray Harryhausen within the span of like 24 hours. It was crazy. It was unlike anything that I'd seen. And I vividly remember sitting watching Sympathy for Miss Vengeance and just feeling that I was in a city that I didn't know, with people that I didn't know, but I felt completely at home. And the Cinematheque felt like my home. And I left Los Angeles for work. And so for 6 years I was gone, and I really missed repertory theaters. And when I came back to Los Angeles, I said I wanted to do something with repertory theaters, and that there wasn't a genre fest that I thought there was a real opportunity for a genre fest in Los Angeles. And so when I came back to Los Angeles, I walked into the Cinematheque and met Grant, and I said, "Hey, I've got this festival." Of course, I didn't have a festival, but I said that I've got this festival, and I basically bluffed to Grant. and bluffed Grant into giving me access to the theater. And then Grant, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, let me plug this. I'm sorry, I'm a mess here when I got to plug in a machine here. All right, so I think I met you first at the Entertainment Weekly festival that we were doing, and you brought in a jersey, right, for Carpenter or something. There's something like that.
Yeah.
So I'd only known him one time, and then he walked in and pitched a festival, and we've done genre stuff plenty, but so then there's often a lot of people just walking off the street and pitch you a festival, and you're like, yeah. So he walked in, and we're like, oh, okay, maybe this guy is got street. And then he says that he can bring Goblin there for 3 days. And I was like, you know what, man, if you can bring Goblin here for 3 days, normally we'd give someone a week.
Let people know who Goblin are, just in case there's anyone listening that doesn't know.
The Italian band Goblin, Suspiria, on Giallo's.
They've done some of the greatest film scores ever.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, Parks, did you actually have any access to Goblin, or were you just like, that's your dream?
I was talking to the booking agent, and at that time, Goblin had never been in the US before, and the booking agent, he didn't really know what he had, and truthfully, I didn't know what we had either. All I knew was, on the one side there was this movie theater that I needed, and on the other side there was this band that I needed. So I told Grant that I had Goblin when I didn't, and I told the booking agent that I had the venue when I didn't.
I love it.
Yeah.
So you were basically reverting to your music manager days.
Yeah, totally.
In the film world.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
It's exactly what it was. I was hustling both sides.
Filmation did this. Then they started out, they told DC Comics they had the show on CBS or whatever, and they told CBS that DC Comics licensed them Batman and Superman. Neither one were true, and then that's how that all happened.
Well, I mean, your Goblin screening,
same thing.
Yeah, your Goblin screening did come true. I was there, and it was pretty incredible.
And let me tell you, because when the Goblin announced, I was like, man, I wish I could do this, right? But I didn't have the resources to do that. So I was like, this is going to be impossible. So when Christian came in, I said, okay, but this was also very late in the game. So we had to just like completely throw out a calendar. And then we went between the Egyptian and the Arrow. And we were just like, okay, now we have to fill up all these dates with things. We have Goblin, but then where do we go? New films, old films. But it came in fast and furious there.
I'll tell you something that Christian, were you going to say anything?
No, I was just going to say, we cashed in kind of every single favor that we could to try and actually present this thing as a festival. And ultimately what it ended up being was about 4 weeks of really random programming, as Grant said, across these two theaters. So there wasn't really any, it wasn't a festival as you know today where it sets up and it lasts for a week and then the carnival leaves town. It was just this series of sporadic screenings, but was really anchored around these, around these Goblin performances.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, just for people that don't know outside of Los Angeles, like I'm old enough. I was there when they did the first screening at the American Cinematheque in Hollywood when it was reopened with, money from James Cameron in 97, I think? I think it was 97. Yeah. And they did like a whole, he would even speak occasionally, if I recall, and like they were showing his films to like kick it off. But the Cinematheque in Los Angeles for a while, I mean, it still is, like it was on like almost like what Parks was saying earlier. It was a little on the quaint side for cinephiles, in which, the Noir Fest felt really organic, right? Because it was like TCM on a big screen years before the TCM Fest started. It was the place where you would go to see Lawrence of Arabia on the big screen when they weren't showing it at the Dome. It was the place you would go to see these classics on the big screen year round, not just on special occasions. But there wasn't a lot of room for the bandwidth of cult films and horror. And what was interesting was you were able to take the list that was growing as email lists and databases grew. And I think, Parks, this goes partly to your marketing, specialty as well. And you were really able to activate it for people that had an unsatisfied niche of cult cinema that just, there was nowhere else to see it. So yeah, we could show like, the classics that we know, right? The tech would show, Forbidden Planet and stuff like that, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But it would kind of be a once a year type of thing. and then you wouldn't get the other stuff, the B grade material that's still beloved. At what point did you start gravitating Beyond Fest in that direction? Because what it did was it really inspired a lot of people to seek out and to show an appreciation for films that in their release often didn't get an appreciation. And it's an interesting thing for an audience to experience.
I think, yeah, it's a good insight, Jeff. I think honestly, it was, again, the goal was simply to give people a home, to give people in Los Angeles a place that they could call their own and that they felt at home in. And the entry point was the films. And so the way that we've programmed, it's always been based around films that we loved. And we didn't, when we started, it wasn't thought through at all. It was just like, man, we love this film. And there's a filmmaker that wants to participate in this. Well, heck, we should do this. And the huge one at the beginning was we had access to Clive Barker. And so just cold call, reached out to him and said, we would love to screen the extended version of Nightbreed, which at that point had just been kind of unearthed, and they've really poorly put it together, but it existed in a way that could screen in theaters. And I'd actually met Clive at a book signing when I was 14. And I was a little kid, and it was on Weave World. And I just wrote this really impassioned letter. And I said, I grew up in England. I grew up on Books of Blood. I've met you for Weave World. And we're doing this thing at this most established theater. We would love you to come and do Nightbreed. And he wrote me, and he was really intense. And we had this amazing dialogue. And it was Clive was someone that I grew up on. And so that's how we did that. We were able to get access to Richard Donner so that we could do The Omen. And it was films that had inspired us and films that we grew up on. We did The Howling with Joe Dante. And, you cannot underestimate the influence of the American Cinematheque, because it is such a revered and established institution within Los Angeles and within Hollywood and within the filmmaking community, that being able to say, we're doing this in conjunction with the American Cinematheque and it's at the Egyptian, automatically, weirdly legitimized the festival. And I say festival loosely, but it legitimized it in the eyes of filmmakers and talent. And so they were like, okay, you're going to treat my film well, you'll have respectful moderators, so on and so forth. But it was always just about programming films that we loved by filmmakers that we loved. And the belief was, well, I think that there are people who have got similar tastes. And it was really, it was kind of, we did the first one and people were like, that was cool, thanks. And then we were like, well, let's do it again. And then people started asking, is this going to be an annual thing? Is Beyond Fest, is this a thing now? And then it was between years kind of 2 and 3 that showed us, it was like, wow, people are actually excited for this thing to come back. And a very small amount of people, back then, the first year, with the exception of Clive and the exception of Goblin, screenings were getting 100, 150 people, maybe 200. We were super excited.
And just to tell our listeners, it was screened, in Hollywood, that's a 600-seat theater. So that would be a 1/3 house. Grant, what's the Arrow's capacity?
425.
Okay.
I just want to jump in. I think the magic is the people, as a Christian Kennedy that came, because with Cinematheque, I'd organized, Phantasm cast and crew reunion and have John Carpenter in constantly. And we'd have these things, but it'd be in January and there'd be one here in March. And we would do genre. And what the Beyond Fest did was rope all that into 2 weeks for people to come. So instead of just going to see the film and having a good time, you're then going into a community of people every day that you see the same people or, different, but throughout the week. That love the same thing. So it was creating that from the people. And then the celebration was built out of the people's passion that would show up to these things. And then the magic that was, unlike the Cinematheque at the time, was the ability, Christian Evram and the other programmers in it, was to get new films that we wouldn't have access to that early. They came down a festival circuit. So, the Cinematheque had brought in Donner and Joe Dante, those kind of things. But the new films, whether it be Starry Eyes or any of the people that came in early, that was a lot of magic. I think it helped that create Beyond Fest.
Well, just as programmers, what are your views on how people watch a cult film? Because at last year's Beyond Fest, a perfect example would be Tammy and the T-Rex, right? Which had gotten a restoration release, and people were coming to laugh at it, not really to totally eviscerate it like Mystery Science Theater 3000, but to, in a way, have a communal experience for a movie that probably not everybody, but a lot of people in the room had seen in some shitty VHS a long time ago, but had never seen in a theater with proper projection and a crowd. So at a movie like Tammy and the T-Rex, it's more of a fun, silly event, and even the director was there that night who was kind of making fun of the experience and the absurdity of all. But you also have cult films that, are things that deserve a second look, that didn't get the right shake in their day. So tell us about navigating that boundary of what a cult film means to you, and how to take it for fun, like Tammy and the T-Rex, but also how to take it as a deep dive into a film that didn't get the cred that it needed when it came out, but grew into a legit following on video.
Yeah, you want to go, Grant?
No, go ahead. I guess I got crazy things to say, but yeah.
So to me, that kind of brings forward what I think this thing has become, and I think that we have engineered some of it, but to Grant's point, it's the audience that control this thing, right? It's the People's Republic of Beyond Fest that we jokingly refer to as the proletariat, but from the very beginning, it's those people that have breathed life into it, and we've always said that if they don't come, then this thing doesn't exist. And without the audience, there is no Beyond Fest. So as long as they're coming, we're going to continue to screen movies. And they really dictate how this thing works. I believe we've got the best film audience and the best film lovers in the world in this city of Los Angeles. And so you can go and see Tammy and the T-Rex, and you know that it will be a raucous experience because that's exactly what that film demands. But then the next night, the next night, it could be Ken Russell's The Devils, and you will hear a pin drop in there.
Well, right. You showed a special cut of the film.
We were one of the last places to be able to show the 35 millimeter. We were threatened with legal action by Warner Brothers, and we were able to show it. What we're also able to do, working with Bernard Rose, who's a friend of the Cinematheque and a friend of Grant's and a friend of Ken Russell's before he passed, we were able to show the scenes that were removed from the film. And we did that after the film. So we're in compliance with Warner Brothers, and then we bent the rules afterwards. And that's kind
screening.
Of, yeah. But it's the audience, and the audience for Tammy and the T-Rex was completely different from the audience that came through for the Devils. Yes. And it's completely different to the audience that comes through for the Jodorowsky screenings that we had with him, and all the way across. But the audience understands what they're watching, right? They're informed, they're educated, they know what they're seeing when they come in. And it's because of that the reward of having Dan Gilroy after we were able to screen Nightcrawler, and he said, that's the best that my film has played. When Paul Schrader, after the longest run that he had with Dog Eat Dog, and we opened with Dog Eat Dog with Schrader and Cage, and after the film played, he said the same thing. He said, at that point, his film had been playing for months across the festival circuits, and he said, that's the best my film has played anywhere in the world. And then you got someone like Zala, who dragged across concrete and Brawl and Cell Block, Bone Tomahawk. He said that his films play better at Beyond Fest than anywhere else in the world because of the audience. And so we're like we're shepherds for this thing, but the thing that really brings it to life are the audience. And so, sure, we program films that we love, but our obligation and our duty is to deliver for the people who are paying the money to come and see these films. It's really about the audience. And so we're in service of them and their needs.
600 people plus showed up on a Thursday at 10:30 p.m. to watch The Devils. Like, that's an audience. That was the most impressed. I was like, they came out on a Thursday night at 10:30 to watch The Devils. And so we balance that with knowing that our audience is vast, with something that might be ridiculous. Like, I found that there was a print of Howard the Duck in 70 millimeter. And when I found that, I was like, you cannot let this go out to anyone else but Beyond Fest. We're going to do it at Beyond Fest. It's ridiculous. Howard the Duck, 70 millimeter, it's insane. And we showed it, and then Leah Thompson came up. And then for the first time, she saw the love that that some people have for this film in the Beyond. I mean, hundreds of people really passionately asking questions, loving it, that her whole mind changed. And you can see her on Twitter, like her whole view of that experience and that film changed in her mind because of the what the People's Republic of Beyond Fest did. And then she was going home tweeting about Howard the Duck, totally changed things. And then they'll come along for a ride. We program for them, but like we got obsessed with Mooch Goes to Hollywood.
You know exactly where I was going with this. I was going to bring this up. Just give our listeners your history with this film and how you basically pulled it out of collective void for all general purposes and revived it.
Yeah, people weren't talking much about Mooch Goes to Hollywood a couple years ago. It was very rarely talked about. And
at all.
What I do sometimes is I turn on Amazon, I just put in a year on Amazon Prime, and then I just scroll for like 45 minutes until I find something I was like, what is this about? And then I'd done like maybe 30 minutes. I'd somehow put in some weird words in a year, and I'd found Mooch Goes to Hollywood. I was supposed to go to sleep, and I was like, well, I am not going to sleep now, because I started watching that movie. My mind was melting, and it's Vincent Price and the dog, and was sexualized. It was fantastic. So then I was like, who's up? So then I started texting Larry Karaszewski. I was like, you got to put on Mooch Goes to Hollywood. And from that moment, I became obsessed with Mooch Goes to Hollywood. I was watching it like daily for a while. No one had really known it. He hadn't seen it. And then he had talked, and then I found out like Leonard Maltin had just now, like it got to him to start watching. So it created this weird wave of people becoming turned on to Mooch Goes to Hollywood. And it never got a theatrical release. The director had just passed away. And it was Alan Davio that was the DP for it, his first thing.
Right, who wound up doing Spielberg stuff.
Yeah, and there's a crazy psychedelic scene where Mooch is at a party. It's like a trippy drug scene with this dog. It was supposed to be for TV family movie of the week, but it was like sexual. Didn't make sense, so it only aired once on cable on network television, and then had never played a theater ever.
What do you think brought it to Prime? I actually thought you were going to tell me some crazy story about finding a 16 millimeter reel somewhere.
No, people put stuff on Prime. It's buried. Like things that shouldn't even be on the Amazon Prime are up there. Like, no rights. It's put up there, and you just have to scroll and dig until you go, here's something that shouldn't be here. So then what happened was then I tried to track down a print in UCLA. The director had just passed away, and UCLA had gotten this print of it, and Alan Rohde, who did the Noir Film Festival, he was friends with the director. So I found it through him, and he opened up the canister, and there was a beehive in it, and like bees were flying around, much like Candyman.
Right.
But then we got it, and we did the first ever world premiere of this. Now, this is a completely ridiculous thing to do. I gave like a TED talk beforehand about Mooch and all my research on Mooch. But it was completely ridiculous. But everyone rallied around it, and the trailer would get cheers. People would wear the shirts. It was just, it's the People's Republic of Beyond Fest is, they're down. They're down to either go see the Devils or revel in something as ridiculous as Mooch Goes to Hollywood. And we needed it.
Mooch was a blast. And you also made things.
We made action figures.
Action figures.
Yeah, we made, there was probably 100 of those. There's collectible action figures of Mooch.
Yes.
My man.
Do people still see Mooch? Is it still on Amazon?
It's probably still on Amazon. We cut a trailer to Midnight Cowboy for it. So it's the music from Midnight Cowboy. Right. It is the Midnight Cowboy of animal films. So you can see that on YouTube. I own probably 10 to 15 different VHS boxes. So it's like really like was released every year on VHS. Christian gave me a Betamax version
Wow.
of it. So you can get it in a lot of different formats if you're into a mooch.
Well, you've had a lot of success at Beyond Fest. When did it all go wrong? What was, I don't need names here, but like craziest stories of like crazy talent, but also technical errors. You know, there's times where as great as the tech is, as great as your projectionists are, there's just times where things just don't go right. So
first I want to say we have union projectionists. They're like the best projectionists in the world.
They are amazing.
35, 70 millimeter nitrate. Let's throw that out there. Those guys.
Absolutely, especially nitrate.
Yeah.
So I see you, Grant, and I'm going to raise you. It wasn't always the case. So there's been a changing of the guard with the projectionist team. The team currently at the Cinematheque is unbelievable. But so I'm going to go back to Goblin. So the band, they didn't. Can I swear on this podcast, Jeff?
You fucking can.
Okay. The band Goblin, they did not have their shit together at all. It was a train wreck. And so those 3 shows that we put together, because you have a full band with an insane rig setup. They barely had their instruments. Some of them didn't even have instruments. And then they're playing to what's going on screen. It was a total disaster. We held that thing together literally by sticky tape and bubble gum. And I was terrified because for every minute of their performances, which were hour and a half long, I was convinced that the thing was about to fall apart and give out at any single moment. So that was particularly terrifying. We really flirted with disaster then. We did, I think it was year 2 or year 3, we did the anniversary of Dog Day Afternoon. Al Pacino came out. The film finished. I took the mic to introduce Al Pacino, and he still wasn't in the building. So I had to fill in. And the only reason why people were at the theater was to see Al Pacino. They didn't care about me. So I had to fill in then. And then I saw him while I was on the mic sneaking through the side of the building. So I quickly threw the mic then. But the scariest one was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre screening, which was the live, the live shows in which we'll have live band perform. So there was this whole thing that Mondo had produced around Texas Chainsaw Massacre with the band, and they'd created this alternate soundtrack, and it was a live accompaniment that played while the film was playing. And Toby thought that we had changed the soundtrack of the film and removed the soundtrack of the film, didn't know that it was a live accompaniment, and so he was threatening litigation against us. And his attorney reached out to us.
That's insane.
And so we had a friend of ours who was an attorney, and so it got really heated. But the problem...
I was on the phone with that attorney. Are we getting to that?
Yeah. So I was going to throw to you, but the problem that we had was that we'd announced the screening was sold out, and it was day of that. There were these legal obstacles that and people were filing into the theater for this sold out show while we were having these conversations in the office. Grant, you want to talk about that scene?
What happened is we had them come out to do the live score. They traveled from Europe. They were there. I don't know what to even get into here. Anyway, me and Spencer had a rough night on the phone with someone, and it wasn't Toby Hooper. I'm just going to say that. It wasn't him. So we had
this question. Why do you think they cared? I mean, like, because I know the importance of a filmmaker wanting to protect their work, but if somebody's taking a film that's like that and trying it in a new fashion with a live accompaniment, why do you think that they found that offensive when there would be no permanent record of the event and it was just a live performance?
I do not know, but
it wasn't Toby.
Yeah, it wasn't Toby.
Okay.
I prefer not to get into rehash it. I'm just saying it's not Toby. It wasn't Toby.
All right. How about this? What would you have done if it didn't work out? Did you have another film that you were going to show?
That wasn't even.
You had no alternative, Parks?
No, you never have an alternative. Then you'll give up. So I'm on the phone with this guy, and I was like, all right. So it took like 10 minutes to get ready for this. Then I talked to this guy, and I was explaining. He was down. He was some Southern gentleman. He's like, And he's like, what's going on? And yeah, I had to explain him what Texas Chainsaw Massacre was and what we were doing. Oh, yeah. I guess, well, you got the rights from the people? Like, yeah. He goes, well, it doesn't sound like anything you can do about that. You might as well just keep on doing it. And I was like, all right. And that was it. But it was a very hair-raising situation up until then. And then we really got the lawyer on about 5 minutes before showtime. And I was like explaining, I was like, hey, MPI, we got it. It's all fine. So that was the closest anything went to just absolutely not happen.
Did the distributor get involved? Because I know that for revival houses and revival screenings, there's a separate distributor that's a little different from the big studio usually, depending on the title.
They did their diligence.
Okay.
Because
I know that gets crazy too.
Situation.
All right. So Grant, what's your talent? What's your crazy talent?
What?
What's your crazy talent story?
Telling you what? My crazy talent as a
No, sorry. I said the question wrong. What's your craziest talent situation that you had to navigate?
Oh, I like, what's my crazy talent? I was like, well, I did throw a roll of toilet paper into the balcony. That was the last thing I did at the Egyptian Theater was a hunt screening, and we were throwing out free toilet paper to people, and I hurled it into the balcony, which is a hard thing to do with the toilet paper. And then I walked off, and then that was the last time I've been in that theater.
Right, because that was right as the pandemic was starting.
Yeah, that was my last thing I did as a film program was throw toilet paper. Craziest talent situation in Beyond Fest. They're all perfect and wonderful, and each in their own every way.
All right.
There's all been kind of levels of insanity with some of them. I mean, so we did a tribute to Wes Craven. He passed away a week before the festival. So we did a tribute to Wes, and we had a panel, and they talked about what it was like working with Wes, and then after that we had a special one specifically with Robert Englund, who obviously played immortalized as Freddy. And when he finished that Q&A, there was a mob rush to the front of the stage of hundreds of people that wanted to get whatever it was signed, whether it was a dollar bill in their pocket, whether it was a ticket to the screening, whether it was a plush Freddy. They mobbed. And Robert is amazing. He understands exactly who the fans are, the influence of fans, and he wanted to sign as much as he could. He wanted to be there for them. But at the same time, you know, fans and a crush of fans, they can get pretty rowdy. Yeah. So that one was ugly. Stallone was ugly. Who else, Grant? There's been
the silliest thing that I encountered at the Tech that was not ugly at all. It was just fun. Was, if you could believe it, I went to a screening of Faster Pussycat Kill Kill with Russ Meyer and the Vixens, and there was this old poster shop that I procured an actual poster. And I was asking them to sign it. They're like, "You want our signatures?" Like, they were so surprised that like I wanted even a signature on there. And they were, as many of the Vixens that were alive were there. And that was a trip. Well, so okay, cult films, and then I want to keep moving forward. What's the one that got away? What's the film that you've always wanted to program that was just too difficult? It just wasn't going to work. And maybe it wasn't that you couldn't get the film, but you wanted talent to go with it. And either they had passed away by the time the things were coming together, or just it's always still on your wish list.
It's always touch and go anyway. So like Jamie Lee Curtis was 4 minutes before press release. Al Pacino 4 minutes before press release. So we're always riding these things. Like the stress level gets really intense near the end. So
right, but I mean, what's the one that got away? What's the one that you wish you could do that you've never done?
It would have to be someone who passed away.
Beyond Fest.
I can tell you what the saddest one was. We were doing They Live. We confirmed They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper. And he passed away 2 weeks before-ish. Passed away a couple of weeks before we were able to announce. But that would have been amazing. I mean, obviously, like, the film it's completely genius, and it's the thing that he's done above and beyond anything else. It's like that's his moment. So that would have been amazing. And
it's an amazing film, by the way. If there's any listener that has not yet seen They Live or hasn't seen it in years, I highly recommend you rewatch it, because it's a film that really, especially under the current political climate in the United States, it was made during the Reagan era as a statement against the Reagan era. It once again resonates in the same way, in the Trump era, which we hope is coming to an end in a couple days here. So, Grant, what was the screening that got away from you? The one that's always been on your wish list?
I don't know. Nothing gets away until they're no longer here. I'm trying to. I always wanted to bring over Nicholas Roeg, and some people got older and frail, and you miss that. I would have loved, my dream I would have loved to have George Romero out for Knight Riders. I had Ed Harris out for Knight Riders, and I'm obsessed with Knight Riders, and I profess my love of Knight Riders to him. But I would love to talk to George Romero about Knight Riders. But you know what? Here's how nothing goes away, because we had Cronenberg, right? That was our ask for probably 6 years, like every year, blah, blah, blah. And to the fact that you're almost just like, hey, this was not going to happen.
You didn't just have Cronenberg, though. You basically did a Cronenberg residency, which was really impressive.
Yeah, it went from 0 to he came and lived with us.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember that phone call to Christian that day when we finally, because he was like, oh, we'll try it again, man, maybe. And it was like in an April. He was confirmed in like in April. So it was also like very early, like the first person. And I got to call Christian and say that, hey, they just said yes. It was it was the greatest.
That's the key. There are so many that just the process of booking, there are so many films that just disappear, and in particular new titles. You'll talk to a studio for months and months and months and months and months. We were building around Candyman this year. We were building around Halloween this year. And they obviously just disappeared over the course of the pandemic. And Candyman was right up to the wire to do stuff with Nia DaCosta, the filmmaker for the new version. So those things, they always disappear last minute, and studios shifting priorities. We reached out to George, as Grant said. The timing just didn't work, and then he passed. George is an absolute god and hero of mine, and one of the reasons why Beyond Fest exists.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to have him in my screening series once for his final film.
Yeah, and he's the greatest, and the stories that he's got. So, we weren't able to get George, but we've done things with Richard Rubenstein, who's been able to share incredible stories about George as the producer of Dawn of the Dead and Martin and Knight Riders. And then, we're screened with Greg Nicotero, who is basically the bridge from that world in Pittsburgh to now. And so the contemporary version of what genre is today. So he's been able to tell those stories. So we've been able to bridge it, but I would have given anything to be able to do this with George. But it is, and to Grant's point, the conversations to get Schwarzenegger, it was about a year and a half of just constant badgering to make that happen. But it was one of the greatest nights I've ever experienced. It was unbelievable. I mean, like, he just walked in, took over, and then left. And it was the closest that I think a theater. It's the closest experience I've had for a theater representing just an all-out rock concert. It was unbelievable.
Well, so, I love the tech, and I love Beyond Fest, and it's bad form for a moderator to talk too much about themselves during an interview ever. But I will say that I was really proud in 2014, basically, to be involved with the Nightcrawler screening that you mentioned earlier, because it was a time where the fest itself was evolving, in which once it was established quickly as a good genre fest, the question was, what happens to the films that fall a little outside the scope of regular genre perception? And Nightcrawler was one of those movies in which, I wear many hats, but one of them is I'm very involved in the awards season. And when the early approaches were happening on Nightcrawler, they were not as receptive because they were scared that if they premiered at a place like Beyond Fest, that they would be perceived as only a horror or killer movie, and that would shun their regular, award season approach. And I was happy to get involved with the publicist and really argue it out that the energized crowd of Beyond Fest that by then had already been established, plus the fact that we were going to podcast the interview. So it would actually leave the theater regardless of who they were showing it for, and you could accomplish two birds with one stone. They were confident with that, and it was a big deal for the fest because it was the first movie to come out of the fest, from my memory, unless I'm doing something wrong here. It ended up getting an Oscar nomination for writing, and a WGA and a BAFTA, and of course, it should have gotten more, but it didn't. And that was like a turning point in which publicists were then seeing that, okay, you've got the Cinematheque, which is this traditionalist institution. It's changing. And of course, their members, some of whom are voters, could also enjoy a film like this. And it was, there's always VIP lists, right? And I'm proud to be on your VIP list when I go. But it was interesting because the publicists fed a VIP list of voters that we had to seat to make sure that there were actually voters in the room that night, which was unusual for Beyond Fest as well. So, I mean, that was one of my favorite experiences. Aside, I think that same year I did Fight Club with both the novelist Chuck Palahniuk and also Jim Wools, the screenwriter, and getting them on stage together and negotiating for a discount with Fox because we weren't sure who was going to show up, and of course wound up selling out. That also ended up wild. But it led really, and this is where I'm going with all this, to this year with Parasite, in which Parasite became, the Oscar winner of the year. It wasn't sure how it was going to do in America, even though everybody overseas had already loved it. But there was a very big Beyond Fest premiere, and you could even see pictures of everybody, Parks, this was probably your marketing design, having those like blinders over their eyes. You could see like 600 of us in the theater with that, just like matching the cover art. So talk about kind of that gravitation in which Beyond Fest could also have movies that go on to have award season potential, which was completely unexpected and against the way it started in its roots. And of course, I should mention at this point that Parasite is a neon film, so that is the connection there. In which if it was not a neon film, it might not have ever premiered there. Yeah,
it's a really, really good observation. I mean, I think about it at the very beginning with the things that we've shown, and then, as you said, that the last one that we had in the theater was October of 2019. The last festival was the Drive-In, which was October of this year, 2020. But October 2019, we went from, as I said at the beginning, doing these Goblin screenings that were just completely out of left field, to the West Coast premiere of Parasite with Bong in person. The night before that, we had the West Coast premiere of Jojo Rabbit. Oscar nomination for Best Picture,
absolutely,
for Best Screenplay for
Jojo ended up winning as well.
Yeah, and one for Screenplay. So we had been chipping away at that for a number of years of just working with studios, building relationships with the studios, and having them understand the diversity of the audience that exists at Beyond Fest. And that's the beauty, that on one night at 10 o'clock, you can show Tammy and the T-Rex and it will be completely gonzo and out of control. And then the next night, you'll have a future Oscar winner for Best Picture. And as I say, it's about the audience. And over the years, we've been able to access and reach all of these different audiences. And the Cinematheque has been pivotal in that as well, in particular for the more highbrow and elevated and art house and potential Oscar, or I should say, an awards opportunity films, because of the relationship that they've got with the Academy, because of the amount of voters, Academy voters that are part of their list. And so over the years, they've been coming to more and more Beyond Fest screenings because we've screened the films that are relevant for them. And so the overlap between something like, when we did the when we were the West Coast prem for the Halloween, the new iteration of the Halloween films, Blumhouse. There's a very small overlap between those people who are coming to see that and those people who are coming to see Jojo Rabbit. It's the same venue, it's the same festival, but the audience is self-selecting.
But actually, you know what? I would almost argue that's not entirely true, though. And Beyond Fest bridges that gap in which because like you would see the same audience showing up, because once you have an active audience that likes what you're doing. I looked around and I saw many of the same audience members that were there on other nights at Jojo Rabbit as well, in which they're like, I don't know what this movie is, but Beyond Fest and the tech are feeding it to me, so I'm going to give it a chance. And I think that's a very important accomplishment of getting people out of comfort zones. You mentioned earlier, Grant, reaching out to Larry Karaszewski, who just last year had Dolomite Is My Name, right? Which also, was in the awards season of running as well. Larry, he's an Academy branch head, and he is at the tech all the time, whether it's a crazy horror movie or a modern film or a quaint film. So, I mean, I think that's the other important thing that the Beyond Fest did in coordination with the tech in Los Angeles, in which it got people out of their zones and knowing that just if you're a film lover, it's okay to go see something that's outside of your zone. So I think that was an accomplishment.
You got Bong Joon-ho spiking a beach ball on the way down. This is a Best Picture winning a film, and it can be fun too. It's also like, this could be a serious film. Our audience is going to respect it. Everyone's going to be, but there can still be a little shroud of fun around this, that we're going to go and see a movie that's going to be great and we're excited for it. There's people waiting for that film to come through. And, sure, I get that. I think it's also like there's this spark of excitement that would sometimes could be presented dully. But just because something's smart and really great doesn't mean it needs to be boring. The whole the vibe can be embracing. Our audience embraces it, man.
Yes, the kindest thing you guys did was as a birthday present to me, you allowed me to moderate the 2001 A Space Odyssey screening, and which we podcast, and that was just amazing.
Hey, let me tell you, that came together. That was a brand new 70 millimeter print that the Cinematheque bought. So that's where Beyond Fest really came together, and Cinematheque too, like access to this, and the Cinematheque saying, you know what, we're going to purchase this because we show it a lot, and premiering at that festival, just a pristine, beautiful 70 millimeter print, plus a Beyond Fest laser show from the people at Laserium afterwards, which was a highlight for me, man.
But it was crazy. It was crazy because people think that these things are so regimented, and I hope I'm not going to get myself in trouble here. You guys gave me a confirmation that I would be moderating the night before that screening. And I was on edge so much, and I was like, am I just going to go enjoy the movie and see it on the big screen, or do I need to really prep for this? And I'm whipping out my Kubrick books at 1 a.m. And you guys told me this after a screening, by the way. It was after a different Beyond Fest screening. They're like, all right, Goldsmith, you still good to do 2001? I'm like, yes, I am.
Gotta have nerves of steel, man. Like when someone tells me bad news or something, I actually get more relaxed. Because
go into the zone.
You did it so many times. You're like, okay, that person's on fire. Let me see. What can we do? Okay. And then you just have to react. But that's because everyone is like that, no matter what you do.
Sorry, Jeff, I was just going to say, it really speaks to, there's literally, you go to any festival, there are massive teams that put together these festivals. And they've all got crazy titles. And there's all these crazy dynamics, and there's all these politics, and there's just so much. Beyond Fest is really, there's 5 or 6 of us, and that's it. And we all have day jobs, and we do this literally nights and weekends, and we do it because we love it, and we want to screen these films, and we want to celebrate these filmmakers, and we want to give the people in this city the best experience that they can in a movie theater. And we don't take any money from that. All the money goes to the 501c3 nonprofit American Cinematheque. And as a result...
Wait, actually, that's an interesting point. So Beyond Fest money is really just a beneficiary of the Cinematheque?
Yeah.
There's no Beyond Fest 501c3 that stands independently?
No.
There's no rental. It's programmed for that.
Yeah, okay. We don't have a bank account. We don't have a penny to our name. Any Any money from ticket sales goes to the Cinematheque. Any money from concessions goes to the Cinematheque.
Right.
Any money that comes from sponsorship, and we've been really fortunate with Shudder and Hulu in particular over the years. They've been really great sponsors. Any money that comes in from that goes into covering costs of the festival. So when Grant says Bong Joon-ho came out for Parasite and was whacking a beach ball, that was one of 70 beach balls that we bought 2 days earlier on Amazon, blew up ourselves. But the money from that comes from the sponsors. So any money that comes in from sponsors just goes straight into the festival to cover whatever it is: donuts, beach balls, travel for talent.
Wait, okay, you're bringing a flashback. You just said donuts. I was at a screening where you guys gave everyone donuts. What was it?
Oh man, we've done.
But they were like specialty donuts at one of the screenings.
We've done custom donuts.
Coming to Daddy?
We've done custom donuts with Donut Friend. Yeah, we've done custom donuts with Donut Friend.
Which are delicious.
Every year for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
There was one that tasted weird though because we told them to make it strange. But
it was Kumail did it. We did it for Better Off Dead.
Yeah.
And because Jonah and Kumail Nanjiani was hosting.
No, didn't one look like feces?
Yeah, that was Come to Daddy. But the Kumail one, he insisted on having like an Indian spice on it or peppers on it, and it was just like too weird.
Were there donuts at a Phantasm screening?
Yeah, we did balls. We did silver balls.
I remember the silver balls.
And I dressed up as a silver ball, and you guys were dressed up like the tall man?
We were the tall man, yeah.
I was dressed up as a
and then for Raw, for Julia Ducournau's Raw, we had severed fingers that were
Actually, I want to talk about the financials for a second. Have you ever had limitations? Because I remember, it was really sad. Alan Parker passed recently. Right. And I was on a family vacation to the UK a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I reached out to him and we did a screening at, oh God, I'm going to forget the theater. It's their kind of New Beverly. Oh my God. Parks, come on. You're British. What's their New Charles? Beverly? Thank you. You got it in one. So we did a screening at the Prince Charles and it was great. And he said he'd be into more of it. And I talked to you guys about like, should we try and bring him out for like a residency? And it really just became that tough thing of like, where do we get the money to fly him out and to house him on an airplane, like to house him in a hotel. And like Grant, you had said that there were some partnerships with hotels, but you told me if I could find a partnership maybe with an airline, and I feel terrible that I was never able to accomplish that.
Here's how so when Beyond Fest started, I didn't tell anybody. So no one at the Cinematheque knew we even had a festival.
That's hilarious.
Because a festival, it needs a huge budget, right? To make a festival that you'd have to have. So the Cinematheque then it was like just happened the next year. And then I'd kind of tell people a little bit because I didn't want it to go away. We didn't have money for a festival. And it's just Christian and, and Spencer. I mean, so there was never I don't know if I can say this, but there was never really even a budget. Like it was all done like trade and like, okay, I'll get that covered afterwards. And then I won't tell anyone I'm doing this, but I know. And so we're just gambling my job. So I was like, okay, we'll make money to cover this. Who knows? So not until a few years ago did I get an assistant. And then it was also done because we have volunteers at the summit, which we got to thank. Like the volunteers will do, they do so much. So we have this army of people that help run shows that, bring in our guests or whatever. We have those built in. And we'll have another programmer at the Cinematheque. Well, then guess what? You're driving Elliot Gould. So it's really like there wasn't a budget until a few years ago. So when we bring in someone like Cronenberg, we try to Telefilm Canada comes through and we try to work deals so that we can actually fly guests in. It's all still, and it's evolving. It's getting a chance to bring in more people, but it was tricky. There was no budget. I don't even know if I can say that, but at the beginning there was no budget.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was the problem.
Sorry, I will guarantee that we do this on a budget that is lower than any festival anywhere. I mean, it's insane, and it's kind of tough when you look at other festivals, in particular around the world. The support that they get, the support that they get from the local, whatever the region that they're in, either from local government or from local film institutions and government film institutions. It's amazing what they get. And comparatively, we get nothing. And so, we deliberately try and keep from a sponsor standpoint to 1 or 2 because we don't want to be gratuitous. We don't want to sell things out. We also very deliberately keep our our ticket prices as low as possible so that there's as much accessibility for as many people as possible. And we try and screen as many films for free as possible so that whether you're an agent or a studio head or you're someone who has just lost their job, and that was something during the whole COVID of this, there are drive-ins where people are charging $60 and even as much as $90 for a car at a drive-in. We started at like $15 because it was like, no, like people are hurting right now and we got to do everything that we can to give them the opportunity to escape. And we're not gonna gouge people for money over that.
Well, and we'll get into the pandemic in a second, but you're right. Again, hats off to the volunteers. Hats off to you guys for letting me moderate because it was always a blast. But it is interesting that hearing you say that you're not operating without a budget, it makes sense because it's like I was literally calling Virgin Atlantic and trying to. I was sending them your PDF marketing kit of what Beyond Fest is to try and explain it to see if we could get a first class ticket for Alan Parker because he really was game to come down and do all of his films for like a week at the Tech if we were going to bring him all the way over from England. And I felt really guilty about it when I couldn't do it. And I actually didn't know at the time, and I'm kicking myself for this as well. I'm sure you guys know this, but I didn't know this, but Kickstarter, you could actually do events on Kickstarter.
What?
Did you know that?
No.
Okay,
right,
so I didn't know that
year.
because I just did my first Kickstarter over the summer. And I realized that I could have tried to kickstart a plane ticket and lodging for Alan Parker as a way to do it.
Wow.
In which that might have been an appeal, but I didn't know it at the time. And it's crazy that you could kickstart something because everybody thinks of Kickstarter as a physical object that you end up with, like a Mooch action figure. But no, you could actually do an event that maybe the people could zoom into or whatever the hell. But anyhow, nonetheless. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. You could find us over at backstory.net. And yes, sir, you could read our free issue if you've never read us before. It's a great way to test drive us, see what we're all about. You can read the free issue at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop. You could read the free issue on an iPad. If you want, after you read the free issue and you dig us, you can test drive us by using discount code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5 over at backstory.net. It'll only work there, but it will give you access that you could use on an iPad if you have one. So use the discount code at backstory.net. And we're getting ready to publish our long-delayed quarantine issue 42. It's got a lot of amazing stuff in it. We've been taking that stuff and putting it live into issue 41 so people don't miss out on some of the things that were timed with live events, but some of our retros and our other stuff that you're used to that isn't timed with a live event. You've never read any of that, and that's all going to be new in issue 42. A lot of great stuff, actually. And then we're going to go straight into issue 43. What can I tell you? We're also rebuilding our archive. This is a question I get a lot. I'll give you the quick explanation because I know you're dying for it. Our archive was completely zapped when we were forced to update our software in January of 2020 or so. And we have been rebuilding it issue by issue. And the pain of this is that to rebuild our archive, we're on issue 42, my friends. To rebuild our archive, we have to rebuild every single article in every single issue one at a time. So it is a royal pain. And doing that while being in production on our new issues is a double pain. So, I give the new content the priority. But, we're back there. You could read at least the last year, if not more already. So we're moving backwards in time. I think we're back at issue 30 or something like that. And we're going to keep moving back in time. So we'll be able to get deeper in the archive. If you're a new reader, you'll have access to whatever's in our archive when you're a subscriber. So that's good too. So look, it means a lot to me to have you consider becoming a Backstory subscriber and checking us out. So thanks for doing that. But now, without any further ado, let's jump back into our conversation with good old Christian Parks and Grant Moninger about putting on 2020's Beyond Fest. Getting to the pandemic, Grant, you already said the last movie you saw in theaters was The Hunt. Christian, what was your last movie that you saw in a theater?
It was the same.
Okay.
We screened The Hunt. We'd been trying to screen it for a while with Blumhouse. The film obviously got pushed, and then we literally did. We were so fortunate. We were able to do The Invisible Man with Lee Winnell and kind of prem that here, and then we did it the same with The Hunt with the filmmakers coming out and the writers, which was amazing. And it was right at the start of the pandemic. And
yeah, it was right before the shutdown. I love The Hunt. It was so sad that it opened that weekend. It didn't get the credit it deserves.
Yeah, so that was the last thing we did. But and the thing played through the roof. It was awesome. And that's the thing. I mean, like, to play, it's so difficult to get people out to a movie theater, but when you do, and they're there, and there's 600 people, and they are on the edge of their seat and they are screaming in unison, there is nothing like it. It's amazing.
I will say, just for a correction, that was a screening that was a free screening technically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little easier to get people to free screenings. So studios host those. So that was like a good thing. But yeah, no, you're right. And I'm glad that those filmmakers had that experience of seeing their film with audiences, something that modern filmmakers don't. Yeah. You know, I mean, like, even Chris, you know, you were involved with I don't know how much involved you were, but with the purchase of Palm Springs at Sundance, which broke records for a sale this year. And, you know, it became the pandemic movie of Hulu. It's a hilarious movie about a day that keeps repeating, which is quarantine and the pandemic. But those Sundance screenings, I was there at Eccles. They were incredible. Yeah, so it's a tough time for filmmakers. My last screening was Last Transmissions, which was a Q&A screening that I did right before the pandemic, and I was almost going to call it off. People were asking me days before, and I just sent out a really kind email about, like, let's all social distance. If you don't feel comfortable going to the movie, don't, because we actually don't want a packed house on this one. And we're gonna ask everybody to sit, you know, a minimum 2 seats apart, and I'm going to shut down the list if we hit a number that would prohibit that from happening. We had Purell, we weren't wearing masks, and that was the end of it. So, you know, I started my screening series in 2003. The first screening was The Station Agent, the Sundance movie. Then my first podcast screening officially was The Island, the genre film. And that's why I've always gone back and forth between the two. And it's a weird time in my life, I know for you guys as well, in which screenings have been such an important part of my life for so many years. 2020 was my anniversary year for the podcast, right? The 15th year. I had all these things that I was starting to plan, like right after Sundance and the Oscars were ending. And it was just like, it just all evaporated. So tell us how you came into this relationship with the Mission Tiki and doing drive-ins, because the other logistic that I want to point out is that when you show a movie, you have to pay the exhibitor, the distributor, a fee. And sometimes it's based on attendance, if you could negotiate that. Other times it's based on if the filmmaker wants to waive a fee sometimes for you know, an oldie. But especially on a new movie, you get into crazy situations. So I think that's why you've seen prices fluctuate, in which organizations were trying to turn some sort of a profit off of it. But you guys were still doing double bills at this year's Beyond Fest, which you pulled off at the Mission Tiki. So let's get into all that now, because I would love to know the logistics and the difficulties that you guys faced.
Well, first of all, like when the pandemic hit, so we were always having trouble with the Cinematheque for money. You know, as you say, we had no budget. So we did come into some money. We had sold the Egyptian Theater to Netflix. And I just like to say that baked into that deal is that Beyond Fest can happen at the Egyptian Theater every year that it's open. So if anyone's worrying about that, that's there. So it was that kept us alive as a company, because we wouldn't even be able to do any of these things. So then we're able to function, keep the staff together. And it was really Gwenda Gleese at the Cinematheque, head programmer there, that she and us began a good relationship with Frank at the Mission Tiki. And we were told that he wouldn't.
Did she have it pre-pandemic?
No. And we were told he didn't want to really do anything. But we had time on our hands. So it was a lot of calls with Frank. And then Frank seemed to go like, you know what, this sounds like a good idea for the Cinematheque. And I was like, well, we should do it as Cinematheque Beyond Fest, because I know people of Republic of Beyond Fest will drive 2 hours on a Thursday. to come to see a movie. And that's
it's technically about 45 minutes from LA, especially in the no traffic situation of the pandemic.
It's taken people 2 hours. Some people have taken 2 hours, depending on what you hit. You can hit
that's the other strange thing is like under normal traffic situations, it would always be 2 hours. But like because of the pandemic and less people have been on the roads, it's actually I've found a little easier. But go on. So you forged a relationship.
I just forged a relationship. They took a risk and they said, "Oh, we'll do 2." And then I was like, "But they're gonna want to do them. We're gonna sell them out. Just trust me." And then I was like, "Christian, we got 2. Let's do it." And then we just started thinking.
But so how many cars would the screen? I think you guys use screen 3, if I'm correct. How many cars would it usually hold? And then what was the car load for the pandemic?
So we got the biggest lot every Thursday because we were like, we're gonna pack it. And
we didn't originally though. They bumped us up. That was the other thing. We were going to be on a smaller screen,
right?
And then we posted the first one, and the sales were so crazy. Because as much as Grant says like, "Oh, we're going to sell out," I wasn't convinced. I didn't know that it was going to be successful. We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are losing their jobs. And it was at the point. It was at the point where it was like lockdown. And the job losses were just insane. And the thing was spreading like crazy. And I was like, I don't know if this thing is going to pull off. But we posted on our social very simply, and we sent an email out to our mailing list.
How many people are on your list?
We don't disclose that information.
Oh, okay. I thought you did.
No, but it's lots. It's really big.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Because we've been able to build it for years and years and years now. So, and the great thing is like there's no fat on it. It's people who have paid to come and see films at the theater.
And you get the Cinematheque one again, which is only people who come through the doors. So there's the good lists.
Yeah.
But we put it up and the response was amazing. And
Insane.
It wasn't about, oh my God, I love this film. I mean, obviously everyone loves Fury Road. It was, oh my God, movies are back. And it was a communal experience. And it was like, whoa, this is happening. And it was insane. And it sold out. And then because of the ticket sales being so fast, Grant talked to the Tiki and was like, look, this thing is burning through. So then they bumped us to the biggest screen. And so that big screen is normally 600, but with the checkerboard parking for social distancing, it's 300 cars. But you can have
the nice thing about the checkerboard parking that I would point out is that because it's every other car with a space empty, when it's done right, there's not even a car in front of you. You're actually looking at a blank space in front of you, which gives you an optimum way to see the screen as well.
Yeah.
We had to switch ticketing services again because it was crashing. They were buying so quickly that one would sell out in like a couple minutes and then it would crash. So it was so ravenous. Everyone was so excited. It gave everybody on something to look forward to. I think they were announced on a Tuesday and we did them on a Thursday. Is that what
Wednesday? No, Wednesday? We would.
I can't remember now.
No, so we wouldn't actually on Wednesday. We would post clues, really abstract, obscure.
But this is
clues.
after it was established. This was after it was established, not your first time doing it. Like your first time doing it, you promoted it properly. Yeah, and then you would give breadcrumbs to what movie is it going to be, and those movies sold out too. Look, over the summer, as a gap, I had never seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And when you guys announced when you guys announced it, I was like, okay, if I'm ever going to see this movie, I'm going to see it at a drive-in. Yeah. And it was, it was like the perfect way to see it. Like I was glad that I waited.
It's a great one too, because it's daytime horror and a drive-in, it shows up really, really well. So it's perfect.
But it was also, that was a film that played drive-ins. We paired that with Evil Dead. And everyone's seen those films except for you, Jeff. Everyone's seen those films a million times. But it was to see it in the drive-in and to see it in the original format and with the original, the way that the score was put together originally. And so for those films in particular, we wanted to be as authentic as possible. Mad Max Fury Road and Death Race 2000, which was the first thing that we did, those weren't drive-in. Well, Death Race was. That was a drive-in movie.
Right.
But so we wanted to be, true to where this whole thing came from. And so, this thing, it just exploded. And what we found And in talking to people was the amount of people that came to us and said, this is the one thing in the week that I now look forward to.
Yeah, I mean,
the one thing that I've got where I get to see other people. Granted, we're 10 foot away and we're wearing masks, but it was the one thing. And the word that it was really emotional, and I felt some weight in this. And so, I just harassed Grant to keep going. But people said that it gave them hope. And in the middle of a pandemic that is brutal, and when that's been taken away from people, when people were like, this, your screenings have given us hope, your screenings have saved our summer, your screenings have given us something to believe in and to look forward to. It's so much more than just us as a bunch of knuckleheads screening films that we love. And, it just comes back to the only reason why this thing exists. We built it at the beginning because we felt that there was an opportunity to bring people together to watch films and to have that communal experience. And to do that now in this environment, the whole thing is really kind of paid off. And we were approached to do a virtual festival. And there were opportunities to do that, but it was like, it's not what we do. What we do is we bring people together to have a shared experience about film. And
yeah, I was going to bring that up because
together.
Yeah, AFI just did a virtual fest this year, and Sundance is going to do it too. And Sundance claims that they might have some in-person events. We'll see how bad the numbers are when those things are getting ready to happen. But it's interesting because AFI was able to do these pre-recorded Q&As inside this app that you were watching their films on. And so the Q&A quotient was slightly missing from Beyond Fest, but at the same time, you guys did pre-recorded Zooms, often with the filmmakers introducing the films, which still gave you the connection to the filmmakers that everybody wanted.
And the Cinematech's been, through this, have been doing online Q&As and show films on Eventive or whatever the festivals are using with the Q&A. And we've done that, but Beyond Fest, it's really about the people.
Oh yeah, so, I was glad you did it. And one thing I'll say, I had some friends that were reluctant to go to a drive-in, and some of them refused. I found it safe. I mean, like, there was a rule that you can't get out of your car. I saw a couple of people at screenings sit in the back of trucks that they had turned around. They mostly kept their masks on. I didn't care. My windows were up, so I was okay. The bathrooms were easy in and out, and they wouldn't allow more than 2 people in there. The only line I saw was for concessions, and I'm glad that they bought concessions to support the theater, but I was at the same time surprised so many people were standing in that line, because I know I brought my own food. I wasn't ready for that. And but it was really safe. Something I want to bring up, and this is the sad thing that's crazy, is that Christian, at some point over the summer, I think you told me that the tiki has been sold. And it's just like it's not even, just to describe the Mission Tiki for people outside of LA, it is there's a magical tower in the middle that has multiple projectors on it that are hitting multiple screens in a big circle outside of them. So it is like a great drive-in multiplex, and it is an unusual amount of empty space for Los Angeles. That's why it's so far outside the city. And I think Chris, you said it was going to be turned into an industrial business park or something?
It's I think it's an Amazon fulfillment center. Is that right, Grant?
Yeah, I think that's it. But I mean, it's the one continuous for the last 50 years drive-in that's gone continuous for 50 years. I just want to say that before the pandemic, I'm not so sure drive-ins were doing so good. So it was an obvious move with all that. Most of them have turned into Walmarts around the United States. But what I also want to point out is we probably could have made more money doing digital. We could have done that, but no one really, we did all through summer and no one really made any money in drive-in. And what I'm saying is Cinematech, Beyond Fest, or Frank at the Tiki. It was, he gave a deal, as you said, we have to pay for the rights to the prints and all of this. Then we have to pay the people to come in. But this was something else. Like, people had to go to a theater. Like, we can't just stay at home. People have to go and watch a movie at a theater, whether it's concrete or inside with carpet. We had to get everybody out and get us all out of the house. So I think it was just like, we just had to do it.
I don't even understand how you could not lose money. One night you showed Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, and Lost Highway. And the tickets, I think, were only still $15. I would think that even 300 cars wouldn't be enough to pay the rights to each of those films. I mean, like, were distributors giving you decent deals for your retro cinema?
Some distributors, we got better deals than usual. I mean, people were coming together. Some not so much, but for the most part, people wanted this to happen. I think distributors wanted this to have an actual festival hit the theater. Mission Tiki thought it was a great thing to do, and so we got some deals. But it was what it was. It just had to happen.
How long is the Mission Tiki going to exist? Like, do you know much longer they're going to stay open?
Through some point next year, I know. So I know it's at least through, I believe, through the winter.
And the decision isn't ultimately in their hands. I believe it sits with the people that have bought the land and their ability to build on it and that timing. But the thing, just getting back to the question that you're asking with regards to the financials, so for something like that Lynch triple bill, the costs are also offset by that by Universal and Blumhouse by allowing us to do the world premiere of Freaky, and they waived the fee on that. Orion did the same for us to open with Snow Hollow, Jim Cummings' film, which is amazing.
It was great.
So you lose a bit of money here on this one, but then you make a bit of money here on this one. And then, rather than looking at it as individual screenings, you have to look at the thing as a whole in totality. And so, the Cinematheque has been the best partner imaginable in being able to source films and to be able to deal with, in particular, those distributors of rep titles. And being able to sell the story of Beyond Fest and what it is that we're trying to do. And every year it gets a little bit easier, and every year it gets a little bit harder, because all we want to do is best what we did the year before and give people just a better experience. And so we're constantly up in the ante, whether it's in the theater or whether it's at a drive-in, because I just keep coming back to this. The only reason why this thing exists is because of the people that breathe the life into it. So we're just stewards,
I would also say that
put this thing on.
Yeah, I would also say that the American Cinematheque, as we've said, is 501c3. In case anybody doesn't know what that means, it means that they're a tax deduction for Americans. If you get a membership, if you donate to them, especially, I always say this, if you have an employer who has a charity matching program, you might get your membership at X and they'll double it, because a lot of employers kind of have those. So, Grant, are you guys doing other sorts of fundraising drives during this time? Because, I want the Cinematheque to exist. I want there to be, a second side to all this where we get to go back to the theaters, and I want to make sure you guys are okay. Well, you know what? How about this? Before we answer that question, Parks, what was your toughest logistic challenge during Beyond Fest at the Tiki? What was the one challenge? You guys even managed to do studio giveaways. I know one night they gave away masks, so you guys still did a lot.
Yeah, the toughest logistics
at the drive-in.
Yeah,
Adams. It's got to be Adam talking to the screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
tell us.
The one thing that I will say is that the audience were amazing. They totally respected the rules that were laid down. They totally understood it. It was an amazing communal experience. But yeah, so we did the world premiere of Arch Enemy, the Spectrovision film, with Adam Moninger, and so we asked him to do a video in which he introduces the film, and he said, but I want to do something a bit more personal. And so so he created a video. And this was Grant's madness. He created a video, but he also started this video and then started talking to himself in person below the screen. And then below the screen, he had a like a PA rig in which he could talk to the audience through like a megaphone or something like that. So he was stood on top of a car talking to the audience, while above him he was talking to himself from the screen. It was all very meta, which is exactly what Adam does. But we pulled that together like 3 days before his screening. So
and that was great because you could call or text him during the screening if you were at there, and he would like pick up, and you could talk to him during the screening because you're in the car.
Awesome.
It's the only time you can text at the theater is when you're at the theater in your car and your windows are blacked out.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask Grant that same question in a second, but Parks, I know you're going to have to leave soon. I guess the last question I have for you, and thank you guys so much for your time on this mega episode. Parks, what would you say has changed the most about your job during the pandemic? Just working at Neon. What's been your biggest challenge?
The big thing, I'm used to working remotely. I worked remotely when I worked at Alamo. That company's in Austin, and I was in Los Angeles, so I'm very conditioned to that. But the fundamentals of releasing a film have just changed beyond any comprehension. The vehicle of putting a film into theaters, and for us, most of our films, art house leaning, we platform the release. It's so impossibly difficult to release a film that generates the awareness that you normally would if you're releasing a film theatrically, the engagement, the dialogue from an audience, all the things that you take for granted when you release a film in a theater. All of that apparatus, all of that framework has completely disappeared. The other thing that you're competing against is it's twofold. The mindset of audiences today. Every day we're staring down more and more people that are losing their jobs, that are losing their health, that are losing loved ones. And so cinema films, they've become kind of frivolous. And so, the only film I think over the course of this year that's really broken through in any kind of meaningful way is probably the Borat film, because it became part of the cultural dialogue because of its statement and its position and its timing around the election, and then obviously the Rudy Giuliani of it all. And so, I tip my hat to Amazon, but it needs to be something that incendiary and something that just breaks out of nowhere. Even a $70 million acquisition like Hamilton, it was gone in a matter of days, and that's what we're living in right now. And so, Palm Springs did an incredible job. It's an incredible film, but it also did an incredible job of sticking around because it was, I think, one film in which word of mouth really carried.
Well, yeah, and actually kudos to you, because like the partnership that Neon had with Hulu on that made it really easy accessible for people. It wasn't really telling them to go buy a film, which has been, the new challenge these days about how many films will they rent on VOD beyond waiting for it to come to one of their paid subscription services. And it was the comedy that everybody needed. Same, by the way, going back a year to you, Parks, Little Monsters. I was recommending that film to friends this Halloween that were kind of like in a gloomy mood and weren't sure they wanted to see a horror movie. And I'm like, how about a horror comedy? And they're like, can you name one other than Shaun of the Dead? And I'm like, yeah, I could name a lot. But I'm like, how about something easy for you? Just go watch Little Monsters on Hulu. And they did. So,
and before we let Christian go, my greatest programming of all time, 2001, Christian's child was about to be born. I said it needs to be born on my birthday. So I programmed 2001 and said that the child has to be born during the Star Child scene of 2001 on my birthday. That's what happened.
Wow. That's impressive.
It was actually exactly what happened. He was born. He was actually born during intermission while 2001 was playing. So
where was I when that happened? Palm Springs.
Yeah.
Oh, but here's what matters to me: was the child born at the Cinematheque? Because that's the only way.
It survived the earthquake during Jaws, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Because in the projection room at the Cinematheque, now that would be That would be something special. All right, Parks, I'm going to let you go. I have one or two last questions for Grant. Look, we always run into each other at these screenings when there's 600 people loading into a theater. So it's been awesome to really talk with both of you guys. I'm sorry we went over time. And Parks, it was great to see you. And you know what? I enjoyed seeing you. I honked for you when you and Grant were on the screen at Mission Tiki, because it was great to see you guys that way too.
That's what it's all about. Just keep on honking. Jeff, thank you for doing this. Your podcast is amazing. People don't understand just the amount of work that goes into this. So,
well, thanks for your time, man.
Yeah. Kudos back to you for keeping this thing going for 15 years. But sincerely, we need more of you, and we need more people like you that are just keeping this crazy film dream alive. So thanks, man.
Well, thanks for chatting with us. I'm going to finish up a couple minutes with Grant, because he just did something quite extraordinary over Halloween we're going to talk about as well.
There you go. Okay.
See you, Parks.
Bye.
Take it easy.
Yep.
So Grant, back to you. What was your most difficult logistic experience, beyond Adam at the Tiki? Was there anything else that was just difficult to figure out? I noticed there were a few people that seemed like tech volunteers helping with parking. Was that something you had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, we had to put our ushers were in orange vests with flashlights, and it compared to most logistics for a festival of Q&A, something it was easier. But people came together. Jim Branscombe, who's the Cinematic Void, did a lot of
which we love. If there's anybody listening, please Google Cinematic Void. Go on to YouTube. They've been launching some old cult classics with great 80s and 90s commercials that they've put in as like a pre-show. Please look up Cinematic Void. But sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, he was working on some pre-shows. He did a lot of the tech with that. Here's what it is. They had, this wasn't me, but I'm going to tell them what there was 2 midnight tech checks for Freaky. So our projectionist and manager, they had to be out there starting the tech check at probably 12:30, because normally we do a tech check for Beyond Fest during the daytime, right? So you do new big film, screen it in the AM, make sure everything's good, bring in the techs, blah, blah. But at a drive-in, you can only do a tech check when it's dark. And if there's a screening that night, well, then guess what? The tech check was starting at midnight, 12:30. So that ran until like 2 or 3 in the morning, and then everyone had to drive back. So logistically, tech checks this year studio calls were crazy.
I got to ask, though, I'm actually surprised to hear you say this. So you brought your own projector, not using a Mission Tiki?
No, it's using the Mission Tiki, but with any studio premiere, they lots of them. They want to do an entire run through, check sound.
Got it.
Colors, Yeah, so, what was that?
Once or twice, I couldn't decide how new their bulbs are, because, like, as we'd said, there were a drive-in that was planning on going out of business, and it's like I noticed I was trying to get there earlier as I kept going to park closer to the screen, because I couldn't decide on the brightness. But it was really interesting, because I did a podcast with the filmmakers of Synchronic, which was at this year's Beyond Fest, and I saw it there and took notes. And then it's strange because the movie's in theaters, I think now, but it doesn't come out until 21 on VOD and stuff. So I'm actually saving it for when it comes out, because it's such a complicated, fun movie to talk about. But those filmmakers told me that they did a retimed DCP for the Beyond Fest to make everything brighter, knowing that the bulbs would probably be less. Did you encounter anything like that with other studios brightening things up a little?
Some people are making DCPs, the subtitles larger. That's one thing that's been happening. I think people are just getting the hang of it. I mean, the 70s, if you go to a collector, like a lot of horror films, they'll be like, this is a drive-in print, which means it's going to be extra bright. It's like the only print that exists. It's a little extra bright, but it was sent to a drive-in. So in the 70s, they knew, or 60s, they knew to brighten these prints because they're going to be playing outside. And you're also dealing with sometimes lights in the periphery that like mess with your vision, that then makes things. So that's how they used to do it. But I think some of the smaller places now are starting to figure it out. Freaky did some weird thing on the fly that was very impressive. I couldn't even explain what they were doing, but they were making it more
as the film was playing.
During the techs, and then they brought in some equipment. This was over my head. It's not even normal equipment that I'd ever heard of, but they really wanted to make sure that was. I mean, it looks
good when I saw it at the drive-in. So
they put in the time, which I love. I'll stay there or do any amount of tech checks anybody wants to do, because that means that they care about how that looks for the director and the audience. Put in the time, but they did. They put in the time. They came twice. So
wow, that's cool. That's cool. Well, look, is there anything else you want to tell us that's different about your job during the pandemic, which I know is everything because you used to run, theaters and programming these live events. But you have, like recently, you've had a few premieres going through, I think, Event Vive and other things that you guys have sold tickets for. And I was glad to see that. You just did something with Miranda July recently.
Yeah, I gotta say the team's been going crazy. It's been nonstop, and we're used to 400 events a year, but now we had to, at the beginning of the pandemic, go from all theater to virtually almost all virtual. So we've had everyone from Spike Lee talking to Barry Jenkins to Jude Law to a Lynn Shelton tribute to Miranda July, and then you could go in through and see her artwork online, like in a virtual experience.
Right.
We did a Spanish film festival, a German film festival that even Cinematic Void's involved in that. They're doing Nosferatu the Vampire over at the drive-in for it. But so it's a lot. And then we got a grant from the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, which is amazing. So they gave us money to start digitizing all of our archives. So that Russ Meyer, I've seen that. I have that audio tape, that Russ Meyer that you were at. So that exists. So all of these things that date back 30 years on audio cassettes and VHS and stuff is now slowly being digitized. And we've created our own podcast, the American Cinematheque Show, which uses a lot of those old Q&As.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Because you're not always releasing them as full episodes, though. It seems like you're kind of combining.
Yeah, we take them as a theme. So like with Larry Karaszewski, again, he was on one that was all about the Universal films that was inspired by Easy Rider. So then we did like The Hired Hand or Diary of a Mad Housewife, and you do 4 or 5 minutes of audio from those. So you kind of just have you piece it together. It's like highlights and clips, and then that's all sewed together with a narrative of what it was about, which is fun.
That's great. That's great. Well, look, it's been great talking to you. I'm sorry we went so over time. It's been awesome talking to you. I think you guys did a fantastic job with this year's Beyond Fest because you kept the sense of community really together at the drive-in. Whatever happens to the Mission Tiki, I'm sure you guys will find another solution. There are other drive-throughs around, but the last thing to end on is you continued and did the strangest thing for Halloween that I want you to explain to just show the sheer dedication of what you did as a programmer. The Gorn Corn experience at the Arrow. Please take it from there. Give us the history of it.
All right.
What you had to endure.
This is one of the weirdest things that's ever happened in a theater, and Christian would have talked about this because it's his favorite thing each year. It's the Arrow Theater Horathon, which is goes from 7. It goes about 14 hours all night, sometimes longer. It's a bunch of horror movies that we put together, and then there's characters, and we've done this for 15 years. And this is going to get real weird, fellas, but. So there's a character called the Corn Gorn. Not really. He's the living god. In fact, not really a character. But I'm saying he's a guy that comes out. This living god. He's a Gorn from Star Trek. He's been coming out for 13 years, and he has like this kind of Columbo trench coat. And the place goes wild, and they worship him. And we show videos about him and commercials about him. And then there's a bunch of other characters, and he's arch rivals with Telly Savalas, and Telly Savalas comes out. It's a whole production. It's insane. It's very strange, but it's both, in a way, I guess you could say it's a little Rocky Horror, but it's the videos that are shown before the films are about the characters in some ways, and the characters interact, and they talk beforehand. And mainly it's that the audience loves Corn Gorn, and they cheer him every year. So this year, and we sell it out very quickly for the last 15 years. So everyone expects to see Corn Gorn, and there's a certain amount of clips that they expect to see every year that they chant with or cheer, and they know all the words. So this was a drag, right? The pandemic, we can't do that. So people said, well, you should do the drive-in. And I'm like, well, it's the movies, but it's also about Corn Gorn, and it's also about hearing each other yell the stuff, and it's having things thrown at you from the stage. Randy throws candy at people, and it's like this whole thing. And I was like, all right, we can do it virtually, but then it has to have, when people come to the Horathon, they come there. Often I would show TJ Hooker at the Horathon. I would show an opening of it, and then I'd take everyone who bought a ticket, I'd go into the database and then give them a character name. And the intro would go on forever, and then everyone in the theater would be introduced. So it's very personal. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a home edition, much like the Family Feud or Match Game Home Edition. And so we created a T-shirt for it that you pay for it, but you also get the home edition, which came with all the videos that you could play at your house. Then it came with a pay-per-view that was free. This is insane, Jeff. Of Corngorn versus Mecha Corngorn. And they would battle in between your films, and we filmed it at the Arrow, so people got to see the Arrow again. And it's Corngorn versus Mecha Corngorn. And then we did a Zoom, me and all the characters, where we announced the fight. And then at the very beginning, though, we sold 100 of these. We did a personalized introduction to everyone's home edition horror-thon. So if you watched Evil Dead and Halloween 3 and Pumpkinhead or whatever, we asked you to give a name of your horror-thon, list all the films. So then
Right, just to clarify for the people at home, like what you were doing was you had obviously been the programmer in the past.
Yeah.
So people weren't sure what they were going to get. Or sometimes you announced it. There would always be like a surprise. But in this situation, you said build your own festival.
It's a home game
for your friends. And then you would have your own announcement that people at home, with their families, they could see.
Yeah. So normally the horror-thon, my thing is almost wrestler/minister energy. So that all night I'm like raging and introducing the characters and I keep everybody up. So I had to come out with raging energy and do a skit with every single one of these characters and introduce their horror-thon and all the films that they're doing and say hello to them 100 times. So we videoed that between like around, I think it was like 11 a.m. or noon, and it went till about 4 a.m. or so of us filming 100 different horror-thon introductions where I like couldn't talk anymore. But the fun thing about the horror-thon is it's an endurance test, and it's like painful to do and host. And I was like, well, if we just do a virtual thing, that's not going to be painful. But if I did 100 introductions, one for everyone who bought their own personal one that we're talking just to you, that's painful. And that's kind of my penance for the year. It's kind of my, I don't know what it is, but it's that I do that. It's painful. And then that's
very masochistic.
Yeah, but it's like a thank you to everyone. I'm like, look, I can't walk anymore, but it normally happens right after Beyond Fest. So I'm completely out of my mind by that point. But it was very successful. And then we gave away, we had T-shirts and stuff. You could come down outside the Arrow and people came down and there was a line. There's like a line around the block. We're like, what? And then Corngorn comes out with their shirts and everyone cheers and then they get their picture taken. And it's completely ridiculous. It's about the dumbest thing you could ever do. But people love it and it means something. So it was really great to see everyone's so happy to see this fictional character. It was like adult horror Santa Claus, and it made people happy. And I was like, all right, that's what we're supposed to do.
I think it was great that you guys did that. And I know it took a lot of work to pull off. And it was, it was a great way for members or people that wanted to support the Cinematheque to get something like a T-shirt or a personalized video, feel a part of the community, know that they were building back with the Cinematheque. So I thought that was great too. Last question for Corngorn. Is corn a reference to popcorn? I've always wondered why he's Corngorn. No,
it's actually just corn. It happened organically.
Well, I know it's just corn, but I've never understood why.
Well,
why corn plus corn? Or is it just because they sound alike?
Before we ever had any characters, it was the first year I did a horror-thon, we had Randy. And then I was like, hey, Randy, you should give out candy. And then suddenly the next year, Corngorn showed up, who handed out corn. There's also toast from a ghost occasionally. Occasionally people get toast from a ghost. But Corngorn showed up, and coincidentally, he wears my grandfather's 1967 Johnny Carson coat.
Wow, so that's impressive.
It's my ancestors are giving back even today.
That's impressive. Well, look, you've been so generous with your time. It was good to sit down and have a chat with you. I can't wait to see what you guys are doing next over there at the Tech. So congrats again on a very successful Beyond Fest during the pandemic. I'm hoping in 21 we get to see each other in person.
Totally.
At a different location, hopefully the Cinematheque for Beyond Fest.
And can anyone listening check out your Fight Club? That was an epic Q&A. Is that online?
It's
right?
Online. You can find the Fight Club Q&A in Spotify and iTunes. And that was a blast. I mean, I adore that film. So it's just like being able to talk about it. And he was coming out with the Fight Club comic at that time. He was just starting to release it as well. The Fight Club 2, I guess is what he was calling it. And I think now he's on Fight Club 3 or 4, God knows. I had to restrain from not asking as many questions. But I can't remember if I told you this after the screening. It was one of the rare times that Chuck and Jim Wools, the screenwriter, had ever actually done a Q&A together.
Yeah.
And so getting them together with the coordination of Fox, which at the time was supporting an R-rated movie because they weren't owned by Disney, it was a little different. There was a lot to coordinate just like on that level too. But it was a blast of a Q&A, man. And
Yeah, it was great.
they gave us like I think they just had started getting a DCP like into rotation. So we decided to go DCP to just make it look really awesome. And it was, I don't know, it was a great night. I love that
Cool.
night. Well, dude, it was great seeing you. Congrats again on Beyond
talking.
Fest. And can't wait to see what the tech is up to next.
Yes, lots.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to the American Cinematheque's Grant Moninger and Beyond Fest and Neon's Christian Parks for coming down and spending so much time telling us all about what it took to put on Beyond Fest. I miss both of these kids, seeing them running around like crazy at a screening, sometimes even being able to run around with them to put on the screening. Whatever the hell it is, I miss going to movies. And these guys gave a live audience experience during a pandemic that was not easy for them to do. They didn't know if it would work because they were asking people to drive a significant distance every single night, by the way, for a week. It wasn't like they just did one screening. They had been doing them over the summer. And it was great. It was great. Kudos to them for doing it. And thanks for tuning in and thanks for their time. And speaking of time while you're surfing around online, if you're looking for something else cool to do, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net, or you could check us out in our iPad app. If you've never read us, I encourage you to read our free issue. There's a lot of great content in there. It shows you who we are. You can read it on a desktop, on a laptop, or through our iPad app. And of course, as a matter of fact, I want you, if you like our magazine, to save some money. So you could save $5 off a one-year subscription using the code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. And that'll save you $5 off a one-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. You can only use it at our website, but it will give you access to an iPad as well if you have multiple devices. And that's all I can tell you. Your support would be greatly appreciated. We're just finishing issue 42, our delayed pandemic issue. It's going to be coming out soon. We're putting the final touches on it, and we're going to go straight into issue 43 and new content. So your support means everything to us during this pandemic, so thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. And if you want to find me on social media, you can look me up as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. I'm occasionally on Facebook. You can look me up there too. I have a fan page or whatever it's called. But yeah, look, I'm more on Twitter than Facebook, so that's the best place to find me. And it's always good to hear from you guys. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.